This topic that Sister Asmaa will talk about is rekindling hope and healing after loss, about resilience and what it means to lose something and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala replaces it with better. And she will talk about her personal journey of losing a loved one. So I will welcome on stage Sister Asmaa. Jazakumullah khair.
Okay, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Jazakumullah khairan for that introduction and for pushing my book, Bismillah Soup. That was unexpected, but nice. So I want to start off my talk by telling you guys a story. It was early 2012, and at that time, my husband Amr and I were living in Egypt. And it was the middle of winter. So those of you who've been to Alexandria in winter know that it's just, obviously it's not like here, not like outside is right now. But it's just thunderstorms, lightning storms, torrential rains, hail, that type of thing. So one of these winter nights, I was craving ice cream, and I was pregnant, so you guys know, like, very specific pregnancy cravings. I had to get ice cream of a specific flavor and a specific brand, so I'd asked him, after Isha, can you please go get me this ice cream? So he left the house, and the mosque was literally separated from our building by just a lane, so like a 10-step walk. So he left the house wearing just like a galabaya or thobe and flip-flops. And while he was praying, I heard it start pouring outside, and the kind of rain that when you're standing there, you feel like there's a faucet turned on over you, that type of rain. So I resigned myself to the fact that I wasn't gonna have my ice cream. I'm like, oh, okay, there's no way he's gonna walk to the store that's like a 10 or 15 minute walk away, come back, dress the way that he is. I'm like, okay, I'm not getting the ice cream. So I waited for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. And after about half an hour, I heard my husband's keys jingling next to the door. So I went to see what took him so long. And there he was standing in front of me, soaked from head to toe, holding a bag with my ice cream and laughing. So yes, I hear the ahs. I think so too. I love thinking about this story and telling this story because I think it encapsulates the kind of man that my husband Amr was. And he's the kind of man who would go out of his way to take care of the people that he loved, whether he had to walk through a literal or metaphorical storm to do so. He was the kind of man who would tie my shoelaces for me when I was too pregnant to bend down. And he was the kind of man who never said to me begrudgingly, look how well I took care of you, or this is what you owe me for everything I've ever done for you. Because that wouldn't really be love, would it? You know, to me, love isn't empty grand gestures or keeping track of who wins which arguments. Love is a quiet stream of mercy and the ability to be yourself while simultaneously being the person that your partner needs you to be at any given moment. So Ram taught me that love is many things, and above all, this true, beautiful kind of love is a mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it's a sign from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, Allah divided mercy into 100 parts, out of which he retained 99 parts with him and sent down 1 part to earth. And from this 1 part emanates all compassion that all of creation exercises towards one another, so much so that an animal lifts its hoof above its young lest it should get hurt. So every ounce of this overwhelming love that I talk about that Am showed to me and my daughter and his family was a manifestation of just one of those parts that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent down to earth. And people have often asked me how I was able to carry forward after losing him. And it's a trauma that, yes, it's not easy to forget and it's very difficult. But one of the things I reply with is that I was able to carry forward partly because of this one part of mercy that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent down to the earth. You know, the kindness that was shown to me by my family, my friends, and even complete strangers was a beautiful testament to that one part of mercy. And when I think about that, when I think about how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends us the people and events and the things that take care of us so beautifully and so fully in this world, how then could any of us despair of the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or lose hope in Allah's plan for our lives when He's kept with Himself 99 parts of mercy? So for those of you who aren't familiar with my story, I'll briefly recount what happened in 2013. So we had moved to Canada, but in the summer of 2013, Amr and I decided to visit Egypt because his parents hadn't yet seen their granddaughter, Ruqayya. So for those of you who remember, the summer of 2013 in Egypt was a very tumultuous time. It was rife with protests. There was this massive propaganda against the democratically elected government, heated arguments amongst friends and family. And eventually it led up to the military coup led by Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. So needless to say, when I was there, I wanted to fly back. I wanted to come back to Toronto and get away from this chaos. And our flight back to Toronto was booked for August 19, but we didn't get onto that flight because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had different plans for our family. So on August 14th, if you remember that year, 2013, one of the largest massacres of protesters in modern day history took place at Rabaa Square in Cairo. And according to Human Rights Watch, around 1,000 people were killed in one day, but that's actually an estimate that it actually could be much more. So on Friday, August 16th, this was 2 days after the Rabaa massacre, Amr went out and he was at a large peaceful march in Alexandria, standing up for the rights of his brothers and sisters who were indiscriminately killed that day at Rabaa. He couldn't remain silent about the injustice that he had seen. Silence was never even an option that he considered. So naturally, being, the wife that I am, I was worried about him, of course, so I called him to see if he was okay. And he assured me that everything was fine. He said, there's thousands of people. This is like a family-friendly march, men, women, children. And then he said to me something that I won't easily forget. He said, I'm on my way home. And he was on his way home in a sense, but just not the home that he or I thought. That was our last conversation. About 20 minutes later, I received a call from his phone with the news that he'd been killed by an army sniper. We later found out that he was, just making sure there's not many kids, okay. We later found out that he was shot through his beard and the bullet exited the back of his neck. And around 45 other men were killed in that same place on the same day. So after Amr was killed, my entire world was turned upside down. I was immersed in chaos, trying to navigate my way out of this country and this circumstance. And so along with the immense grief, I used to do this thing where I would close my eyes and I would try to picture what my future would look like in 5 years or in 10 years or even in 2 months. And all I could see was just a dark, blank screen. Nothing, because everything that I planned with my husband was now irrelevant. And it's kind of like, I'm sure that some of you guys have had this happen to you, when you're working on something, on like hundreds of projects on your laptop, and then suddenly it dies. And you're there trying to press every single button that exists on that computer, trying to access what you've lost, but you don't know whether you're ever going to be able to access what you've worked so hard on. So when people ask me how it was that I recovered from this dark and chaotic time, the most honest answer that I can give is through the reading and the contemplation of the Quran. Because up until this point in my life, when I reflect back to pre-2013, I'd taken the Quran for granted. Yes, I read it, and I would take courses here and there, and I wanted to understand it and apply it. But in all honesty, I didn't understand how essential it was to my actual existence, and how essential it was for my mental health. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually says about the Quran, O mankind, there has come to you instruction from your Lord and healing for what is in the chests and guidance and mercy for the believers. So after Amr passed away, I approached the Quran with a kind of urgency that I had never felt before. I was like this lost traveler in the desert, about to die, just on the brink of death. I hadn't drunk water in days. So when I took that first sip of water and experienced how much it quenched my thirst, I never wanted to stop drinking. And of course, the Quran was that sip of water. It eased the pain and it lightened the weight that was pressing down on my shoulders. And it made me understand that I wasn't alone, that there were generations upon generations of prophets and messengers and righteous people who went through these immense trials and who succeeded through their patience and their faith. There were days that I didn't want to put the Quran down. I didn't even want to, put it down to eat or sleep. And I remember at that time I made a decision. I'm like, I'm not going to watch TV. I didn't watch TV for an entire year, except for 2 things. One episode of Chopped on the Food Network, and Frozen, because when you have kids, somehow Frozen gets into your life, even if you don't want it to. But I made the decision to cut it out of my life because I refused to numb the emotions with mindless entertainment. I wanted to feel everything. I wanted to intimately know my grief because I felt that without truly knowing it, I would never be able to emerge from it. And it's incredibly easy to numb yourself, to avoid thinking about or feeling whatever's causing you pain. And that's what society actually encourages us to do if you think about it. And at its essence, it doesn't really matter what you're using to numb the pain because the result is the same. It's an accumulation of emotions and traumas that you've refused to feel, that you've refused to deal with. And then they've been silenced. And guess what? You know, when you attempt to silence those emotions, you better believe that they're going to come back at some point, and probably in a much more damaging way. And those are things that it affects your mental health when you don't deal with it, when you kind of just keep burying it. 5 years down the road, 10 years, 50 years even, it'll come back. So instead of doing that, I completely immersed myself in the Quran. And while I read it, I felt really connected to the rich history of those who were tested before me and who rose in status with their patience and overcome that which hurt them. And I'm going to give you a few examples that have always stood out to me, but the beauty of the Quran is that when you read it coming from your life experiences, you will pick up different stories and different things that touch you. So these are some of my examples. There is Asiyah radiallahu anha, who was tortured to death by the orders of her own husband, Pharaoh, just because she believed in the message of Prophet Musa alayhi salam. So she was betrayed by the person that was supposed to be in her corner, if you think about it. Somebody who, by the very nature of his relationship with her, a spousal relationship, should have at least shown mercy or some level of restraint. But in that moment, knowing that she was at the precipice of death, she could have recanted her faith. She could have begged for her life. She could have offered her torturers wealth if they allowed her to secretly escape. But she didn't do any of that. Instead, she shed her attachment to this world. She turned her face towards the sky and she said, "My Lord, build for me near you a home in Jannah." So before she asked for the home in Jannah, she specified her dua. She said, "Build for me near you a home in Jannah." So nearness to her Creator was her priority. The home came second. So understanding and saying her dua taught me to tear myself away from the betrayal that I experienced and from the torture that was inflicted upon my heart. And it taught me to set my eyes on what really mattered, which is the honored company of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the afterlife. There was Prophet Yunus who cried out to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from beneath three darknesses: the darkness of the belly of the whale, the darkness of the ocean, the darkness of the night. And he said, "There is no deity except you, exalted are you. Indeed, I have been amongst the wrongdoers." And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responded to his calls. He freed him from the belly of the whale. He cured what ailed his body. He returned him to his people who, in his absence, had actually all embraced the faith and accepted the truth. So this taught me that no matter how deep the darkness in my chest was, how lost I was amongst the people, and how alone I felt, if I just reached out to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He would hear me, He would see me, and He would save me. Then there was Maryam alayhi salam, who gave birth alone, completely alone. And she was in so much pain that she not only wished for death, she wished that she was forgotten. She wished that she was somebody that people would never think about again. They wouldn't miss her or even think about her. But instead of reprimanding her, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends her words of comfort and was said to her, "Do not grieve." And it taught me that even though I had my weak moments where my patience crumbled and maybe I acted in a way or said certain things that are contrary to what true patience entails, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could and would forgive me if I sought His forgiveness. And it helped me forgive myself too, because if Maryam alayhi salam could have this very human crack in her patience, then, and she's still known to this day as the best woman in all of humankind, then surely I also had the chance to patch up the cracks in my patience too. Then Maryam alayhi salam was told to get up and shake the palm tree. So the dates would fall and she could eat and drink to her satisfaction. And for those of you who've seen thick trunks of palm trees, you'll know that shaking one is not very easy. Those of you who've gone through labor and delivery know that standing up after one is very difficult, let alone doing anything physically demanding. But the fact that she got up and she shook the tree taught me that being in a state of pain didn't exempt me from working hard. So after a little while, I stood up and I started to work. I pushed through the pain, I pushed it kind of to the back of my mind, and I started writing, I started helping in small ways with charitable causes and campaigns that I believed in. And knowing that I was able to do something of benefit helped me to realize that I still had a purpose to fulfill on this earth. And then there was Prophet Yaqub, who was apart from his most beloved son Yusuf for years. He has one of the most touching statements in the Quran to me, from my perspective. He said to his sons, "I only complain of my suffering and my grief to Allah, and I know from Allah that which you do not know." So this statement taught me to only complain to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala about the pain that people had inflicted on my heart, and never to mistakenly complain to people about the pain that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala caused. Prophet Yusuf's story is one of the most well-known stories in the Quran. There's an entire chapter dedicated to it. He was thrown into the well by his own brothers. He spent years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. He was forgotten by most people in the world. And some scholars say that his separation from his father was actually 40 years. And it got to a point where his father Yaqub actually went blind from grief over his separation. And later in the story, there's a part of the story that's so small, but it's so beautiful. So when his other sons returned from Egypt after being in the presence of Yusuf, they hadn't told their father that they had seen Yusuf, but he said, "Indeed, I detect the smell of Yusuf." So for 40 years he grieved. For 40 years he held on to hope that he would see Yusuf again. And for 40 years he didn't forget the smell of his son. It's a pain that's so real and palpable that we can't help but connect to it. And yet after all of it, after a lifetime of living through this pain and this injustice, the two prophets, Yusuf and Yaqub, weren't seeking revenge for what had been done to them. They didn't want to see their family members punished. Instead, Yusuf said to his brothers, "No blame will there be upon you today. Allah will forgive you, and He's the most merciful of the merciful." And Yaqub said to his sons, "I will ask forgiveness for you from my Lord. Indeed, it is He who is forgiving the merciful." And at the end of the story, Yusuf says to his father, a beautiful statement. He says, "And my Lord was certainly good to me when He took me out of prison and brought you here from Bedouin life, after Shaitan had induced enmity between me and my brothers. Indeed, my Lord is subtle in what He wills." So if you think about this kind of mercy and gratitude, it's amazing. You know, these two men were so forgiving of others and so grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even after potentially 40 years of this pain and injustice. But they understood something that's sometimes lost on us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is subtle in what He wills. So the disappointments and the tragedies that we face, they're never standalone events. There's no such thing as a meaningless moment of pain or a random sequence of setbacks. Everything in our lives was planned just so to call us back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to push us towards the path of our righteous predecessors, to invite us to raise our hands and acknowledge Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as our Lord. But sometimes when we have unpleasant days, you know, we start questioning everything. We can't immediately find meaning and epiphanies in our pain, so we just assume that there are none. But the reason we can't find meaning is because we haven't waited patiently. You know, we don't trust that with time, every single event that has happened in our lives will unfurl itself to show us just how merciful Allah's subtle plan was this whole time. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brought Yusuf up from the bottom of the well, out of the darkness of the prison cell, and into a position of power and influence. And long after his death, his story continues. It's immortalized in the Quran and the collective conscious of believers throughout history and all over the world. And this taught me that we can also create a legacy for ourselves through patiently trusting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and working hard, even when we haven't seen that first ray of sunrise yet. We push through the darkness, knowing that with every difficulty comes ease. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says at the end of Surah Yusuf, "Indeed, he who fears Allah and is patient, then indeed Allah does not allow to be lost the reward of those who do good." Nothing is lost on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Everything planned by Him is exactly 100% right. And if you asked me just a few years ago whether I'd ever write a book or books, whether I'd ever have a business, whether I'd ever stand on this stage and speak alongside amazing scholars and esteemed speakers, I would have just laughed. I would have laughed and said, "There's no way." It's not even something I wanted. But you know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala plans for us, and He maps out our lives in a way that sometimes we don't understand at first, but always, always, always in a way that's so much better than anything we could have planned for ourselves. So I want to end my talk with another story from my life with my husband, because, you know, just got to do it. So after we were married, Amr and I went on a trip to the Sinai region of Egypt. And when we were there, we decided to climb Mount Sinai. I don't know why we decided to, but we just thought it would be a cool thing to do. So we left our hotel in the middle of the night with a group of tourists, and we drove for a long time. And then we began our ascent at around 3 o'clock in the morning, because you're meant to climb and then see the sunrise when you're sitting on the summit. So Mount Sinai is surrounded by other mountain peaks as far as the eye can see. So as we were walking through the dark, there were these sort of huge shadows looming around us. And like, I was in absolute awe of the thousands upon thousands, millions probably, of stars that speckled the sky. And for me, being born and raised in Toronto, I never saw anything like that before. And it was a view that was awe-inspiring, but also in a way frightening. Because even though the sky was speckled with all these millions of stars, the path ahead of us was completely pitch black. And all we were armed with was these really weak flashlights that just showed us literally 5 steps ahead in our path. And I couldn't see the top of Mount Sinai in the dark, right? It was so dark. But as we climbed the mountain, and the dawn light began to emerge. And I was finally able to see just how high the mountain was. At that point, I turned to Amr and I said, if I had known the mountain was this high, I would have never let you talk me into doing this. And I was actually kind of mad. But because I didn't know how difficult it was going to be, I tried it. I just put one foot in front of the other. And yes, after some difficulty, I was sitting at the summit and surveying the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when you're on the summit, no matter where you look, 360 degrees, there isn't a single sign of civilization. It's just mountain peaks as far as the eye can see. So needless to say, I didn't regret climbing the mountain, even though it was very difficult. So my point is that the darkness scares us. The fact that we can't see except what's immediately ahead of us, it scares us. The faint looming shadows of what might be scares us. But if we stood at the base of the mountain of life in unadulterated daylight, and we saw exactly, we saw the path that led to the peak, and we saw exactly what was going to happen in terms of the pain, the exhaustion, the injuries, the scrapes, and the bruises, would we have ever climbed? I wouldn't have climbed if I got there in the daytime and I saw the peak. I'd be like, no way, I'm not doing that. Would we have attempted anything at all? We don't often think this way, but darkness is a gift, and the unknown is a gift. It gives us courage to try. It gives us courage to say, maybe it's just going to be a few more days until I reach the summit, maybe just a few more hours, maybe just 2 or 3 more steps. So yes, we can't see what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has planned for us. And we don't know when we're going to reach the summit of our goals. We don't know ahead of time that it's going to hurt, that we're going to be injured in the process, that we're going to lose our fellow climbers in the night. We don't know, but we can't know. Because if we did, we'd never climb. If we never climbed, we'd never achieve anything. We'd never understand the purpose of our tests, and we would lead unbelievably small and insignificant lives. Trusting in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala means that your feet keep moving forward even when you can't see what's ahead. It's knowing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to care for you, and it's knowing that He's going to grant you the gift of courage to keep going even when it seems difficult, and the gift of healing when you fall, not if you fall, but when you fall. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's guidance is the only light we need in the darkness of the unknown. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us the light we need to walk forward in this life and the light we need on the day of judgment, and to never leave us to the care of our own selves, even for the blink of an eye. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.